My husband claimed he lost his memory after the accident. The fluorescent lights of the ICU cast a sterile, unflattering glow on Henry's face. He looked exactly the same. Same strong jaw, same dark hair that always needed a trim. But the man lying in the bed was a husk of the man Alara married. A doctor in blue scrubs stood by the foot of the bed, delivering the crushing news for the third time. Henry suffered from profound dissociative amnesia following the car accident. He had no memory of his past life. None. He did not recognize Alara, his wife of 7 years. He did not recognize the photographs she brought. He looked at her with a bland, polite confusion, the kind reserved for a helpful stranger. Alara felt the grief of widowhood but without the finality. Her husband was physically present but spiritually totally gone. This was not a quick, clean break. This was a slow, agonizing erasure. The accident itself was strange. Henry had driven his SUV off the Aminus 8 near the mountains. The police called it a single-vehicle collision. He was conscious when the paramedics arrived, but his first words were not Alara's name. They were a question about the time. Henry was a successful independent consultant. He specialized in complex systems integration. He had a predictable life. This random, severe crash defied all logic, but the doctors assured Alara that brain trauma worked in mysterious ways. Alara didn't know then that the collision was anything but random. Henry was running out of time. He had been tipped off that the organization he worked for was moving against him. He chose the amnesia. It was a perfect, medically verified cover. If he was found by his enemies, he was useless, a compliant blank slate with no memory of the crucial data. If he was found by Alara, he was safe, tucked away in the comfortable life he had fabricated, buying him precious days. He survived the accident with minor physical injuries, but the cover was a success. He was profoundly lost. The problem was, Alara was now profoundly lost, too. She moved him back to their quiet suburban home in San Diego 2 weeks after the crash. Every evening was spent cooking for a man who didn't remember his favorite dish. Every night was spent sleeping next to a stranger who wore her husband's face. She clung to hope. That was the only thing she had left. Hope that one day his eyes would lock on hers, and the spark of recognition, the warmth of memory, would return. But deep down, a cold, hard suspicion was beginning to form. This profound, all-consuming amnesia felt too convenient. Too complete. Weeks into Henry's recovery, Alara was attempting to reintroduce some normalcy. She went through the few items the hospital had given her, a crumpled paper gown, an old paperback novel, and his expensive automatic wristwatch. It was a gift from Alara on their 5th anniversary. Henry loved its technical complexity. It was a dual time zone piece, displaying both the local time and a secondary GMT reading for travel. Alara picked it up and wound the crown, getting the local hands moving again. The Pacific Standard Time was correct. Then she noticed the secondary dial. It was set precisely to GMT plus 2 hours. That meant the watch showed the time in Cairo, Egypt, or Tel Aviv, Israel, or any other city in that specific time zone band. Alara frowned. Why? Henry always set his travel hand to UTC or left it on the local time. He rarely traveled east of the East Coast for work, and he never set it to a random foreign city's time zone. He certainly had never mentioned Cairo or Tel Aviv. They had planned a trip to Italy the previous year, but never made it further than the brochures. This was not a mistake. The watch was a complex piece of machinery, carefully set by Henry. He was meticulous about his belongings. Alara held the watch tightly. If he truly had profound amnesia, how could he possibly have set a secondary time zone for a destination that held absolutely no meaning to him now? The watch was a small, silent challenge to the doctor's diagnosis. It was a crack in the wall of his perfect, medically verified blank slate. If this man could remember to set a highly technical piece of equipment to a specific foreign time, then he had not lost all his memory. He had lost some of it, or perhaps he had simply chosen to lose it. She felt the first sharp sting of suspicion. It was a far more painful realization than the initial grief. The watch became Alara's obsession. She had to know what was on his phone. She waited until Henry was asleep or watching television with that distant, polite expression before retrieving his devices. First, the smartphone. Henry had unlocked it for her when he first came home, offering it up like a neutral object. Alara spent hours scrolling through it. It was almost totally empty. The text history was gone. His photo roll contained only 20 or so bland images of their cat and a few sunsets. His email was clean, showing only routine correspondence with Alara and basic utility bills. There were no navigation histories, no search data, no strange applications. His entire digital life was a ghost town. This was not what a computer consultant's phone should look like. Henry worked in systems integration. His phone should be overflowing with technical notes, client messages, and complex diagrams. The extreme emptiness felt more suspicious than any incriminating text message. An innocent man who lost his memory would simply leave his chaotic digital life intact. This was the work of someone who cleaned house. Next, the laptop. Henry had already provided her with the password, a simple 4-digit PIN she vaguely recalled him using years ago. He was apologetic that he couldn't remember the newer, complex one. Alara accessed the machine. It was fast, expensive, and almost completely barren. The desktop contained 3 files: a spreadsheet for his estimated taxes, a draft of a fictional software project, and a link to a stock market news site. All his professional directories were empty. All his cloud drives were disconnected. The laptop had been freshly wiped and reinstalled with a clean operating system before the accident. Alara's heart sank, but her resolve hardened. This was a massive, calculated lie. The man who had been her husband was not simply an amnesiac. He was an operative, and he had spent serious time erasing his trail. She realized her assumption about Henry being a normal consultant was wrong. His career was the perfect cover: high pay, remote work, and vague specialization. He needed that clean cover for his real job. Alara started searching his physical possessions. She went through his coats, his luggage, and the back of his sock drawer. Nothing. His suits were clean, his clothes were normal, and his wallets were empty save for a driver's license and a few US bills. She reached deep into the pocket of a seldom-worn tweed jacket that smelled faintly of cigar smoke, a scent she hadn't encountered in years. Her fingers brushed against a small brass key. It was not a house key or a car key. It was a distinctive, small key labeled with a piece of faded masking tape. The tape was marked in Henry's tight, precise handwriting, P.O. Box 335. Alara felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. He had planned this, staged the accident, wiped the digital trail, and then, in his rush, forgot this one crucial analog clue. The key pointed to a P.O. box at the local postal annex, a mere 2 miles from their home. She knew she had to wait until the morning. She had to pretend everything was fine. She had to look Henry in the eye and pretend she still believed the man who stared back at her was truly lost, not purposefully hidden. The next morning, Alara manufactured an excuse about needing to drop off packages. Henry watched her leave, offering his usual blank smile and wishing her a good day. It was like living with a polite, vacant tenant. The postal annex was busy. Alara slipped into the small booth area and found P.O. Box 335. Her hands were trembling as she inserted the small brass key. The tiny lock turned with a soft, mechanical click. Inside, the box was not filled with bills or junk mail. It contained 3 things: a passport, a sealed manila envelope, and a black, ruggedized USB drive. Alara shoved the items into her large handbag, feeling intensely exposed despite the privacy of the booth. She drove immediately to an isolated coffee shop parking lot and began to examine her spoils. The passport was the most shocking. It was Henry's, but newly renewed and barely stamped. She opened it to the visa pages. The sheer volume of official stamps over the last 18 months contradicted everything she thought she knew about his life. There were short, high-value, covert trips. A stamp from Ataturk Airport in Istanbul, Turkey. Another from France list international in Budapest, Hungary. 2 stamps from Zurich, Switzerland. The travel was always quick, often just 72 hours, never long enough to trigger questions from Alara. He would tell her he was attending a consultant conference in Denver or a client meeting in Boston. His actual destinations spanned the globe, focused squarely in areas of high geopolitical friction. Alara reeled. How had she missed this? She realized the brilliance of his deception. He didn't take long vacations. He took short, frequent trips that could be easily covered by the vague promise of business. He would return jet-lagged, but he simply claimed he was up all night coding. She set the passport aside, her fingers sticky with sweat, and picked up the manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy-duty packaging tape. She tore it open and found 10 crisp stacks of $100 bills, bundled and wrapped in a rubber band. The currency was not all US dollar. There were also stacks of EUROS and several unfamiliar bills that she later recognized as Israeli shekels. The total amount looked staggering, certainly over 30,000 US dollar equivalent. This was not the kind of petty cash a systems consultant kept in a P.O. box. This was operational money. Finally, she picked up the USB drive. It was heavy and felt extremely durable, designed to withstand extreme conditions. There was no logo or label on the outside. Alara knew instinctually that this was the real key. The watch pointed to the destination. The passport proved the travel. The cash funded the operation. But the USB drive contained the truth of what Henry was actually doing. She had been living a complete, total fabrication. Her husband wasn't lying to her because of amnesia. He was lying to her because he was a secret agent or something far worse. She needed to get home and figure out how to access that drive without alerting the operative currently sleeping in her master bedroom. Alara returned home, concealing the cash, passport, and USB drive in a storage container in the garage. She knew the items couldn't stay there forever, but they needed to be outside the immediate living space. The next piece of the puzzle had to be the safe. Every spy in a thriller had a hidden safe, and Henry was proving to be a perfect, if unsettling, cliché. She started systematically searching his home office. It was a large room, sparsely furnished with high-end, modern pieces. Nothing obvious. Alara remembered one of his peculiar old habits. Whenever he was stressed about a deadline, he would pace the length of the room and stop exactly 3 feet from the bookshelf. He would run his hand along the bottom shelf before turning back. She approached the custom-built bookcase and knelt down. The bottom shelf, near the floor, looked slightly too thick. She ran her fingers along the rear edge, pushing firmly. A 3-foot section of the skirting board near the base of the shelf clicked and hinged inward, revealing a small, recessed safe embedded in the wall behind it. Alara stared at the heavy steel door. This was real. This was the moment of no return. The safe required a 12-digit electronic combination. She immediately ruled out obvious dates like their anniversary or her birthday. Henry was smarter than that. She recalled a comment Henry had made years ago, before they were married. He always used the same PIN for his banking until she made him change it, but that PIN was based on the day he landed his first major consultant contract. A date she knew exactly, minus his mother's age at the time. It was a sentimental calculation, designed to be memorable to him, but seemingly random to an outsider. Alara tried the combination. Beep, 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 beep. The locking bolts retracted with a loud, mechanical thump. She pulled the heavy door open. Inside, the safe was neatly organized. There was no more cash, but it contained 2 essential tools: a rugged, utilitarian satellite phone and a manila folder filled with small, handwritten receipts and coded notes in a language Alara did not recognize. The sat phone confirmed her suspicions. It was an operational device designed for secure global communications outside of traceable public networks. She checked the call history. It was empty, but the memory was likely remotely wiped after every use. The device felt cold and heavy in her hand. The safe's existence proved Henry's meticulous nature and his duplicity. He was a professional. Yet he was lying on her couch right now, seemingly unable to put 2 thoughts together. Alara had enough evidence now to know the amnesia was a lie, but why was he maintaining the pretense? Was he hiding from her, or was he hiding with her? The sight of the sophisticated tools made her realize her domestic drama was actually an international thriller. Her next step was to find out what was on that USB drive, even if it risked everything. Alara knew she couldn't analyze the USB drive herself. The encryption was certainly professional grade, perhaps even military. She needed help, but she needed help she could absolutely trust, someone outside her immediate social circle. She drove 3 hours north, to a former coworker named Samuel who had left the marketing world to start an IT security firm. Samuel was paranoid, brilliant, and owed Alara a massive favor from a complicated deal 5 years ago. She met him in his secure, windowless office late on a Friday night. She placed the black, unmarked USB drive on his desk. "I need you to open this," she said, her voice tight. "I need to know exactly what's on it and who it belongs to. Do not connect it to your main network. I suspect it's hot." Samuel raised an eyebrow, used his own proprietary hardware to access the drive, and got to work. He worked for hours while Alara paced the small room, reviewing the clues. The watch set to GMT+2, the cash, the passport stamps. Finally, just past midnight, Samuel whistled softly. The encryption is state-of-the-art, Alara, not the work of some hacker kid. This is government-level compartmentalization. He pulled up the contents. They were mostly complex schematics and code. Samuel navigated the files quickly, translating the technical jargon for her. "This isn't software development," he said, his voice dropping. "This is an advanced data intrusion program. This technology is capable of reaching into secure, segregated systems, like government financial records, or maybe even the power grid, and running silent, deep-level data mining." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't about a cheating husband. This was about national security or even international terrorism. Samuel continued, explaining the true danger. "The technology isn't just for listening, it's for remote intervention. If this program is activated, it could theoretically shut down critical U.S. infrastructure, financial markets, public utilities. This is extremely high-value, extremely dangerous tech." He found the metadata buried within one of the encrypted schematics. "Ah, here we go, a contact file. It's highly protected, but I pulled the name." He turned the screen toward her. Written clearly on the document was the title of a contact, including their geographic area of operation. The name was Katrina Thodorou. The base of operations was listed as Athens, Greece. Athens, Greece. Alara felt a wave of nausea. Athens is also in the GMT+2 time zone. The watch, the seemingly random time setting, was now perfectly explained. It was a subtle, coded reminder of his primary operational contact, or perhaps his home base. Henry, the quiet software consultant, was a systems expert working with a shadowy, powerful group capable of destabilizing the country. And the organization knew the USB drive, the blueprints for their ultimate weapon, was missing. "I think your husband wasn't just an amnesiac, Alara," Samuel whispered, his face pale. "He was an asset, and this drive is the reason they are going to come looking for him or for you." Alara gathered the USB drive and the decoded information. She thanked Samuel, warning him to wipe his equipment and forget everything. She drove back to San Diego, no longer a hopeful wife, but a terrified woman carrying the blueprints to a potential global disaster. The discovery of Katrina Thodorou and the deadly nature of the schematics fundamentally changed how Alara viewed her home. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a potential target. She stopped asking Henry about his memory. She simply watched him, searching for any flicker of awareness behind his vacant gaze. She slept fitfully, the USB drive secured in a waterproof container hidden deep within the backyard compost pile. 3 days after meeting with Samuel, the phone rang late in the afternoon. Alara was in the kitchen, and Henry was seated on the couch, pretending to read a magazine. She looked at the caller ID. The number was strange, a local prefix, but the name was listed as service unavailable. She hesitated, letting it ring. Henry shifted on the couch. He lowered the magazine slightly, his eyes fixed on the ringing phone. Alara had grown accustomed to his complete emotional neutrality. He rarely reacted to anything unexpected. But now, his knuckles were white where he gripped the magazine. She picked up on the 5th ring, answering with a cautious, "Hello." The line was silent for a moment. Then a voice, sharp and accented, spoke. It was a woman's voice, cool and precise, asking for Henry. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number," Alara said, trying to keep her voice level. "No, I do not," the voice replied, with zero hesitation. "Tell Henry that the retrieval process is initiating. He knows what that means. Tell him GMT+2 is waiting." The line clicked dead. It was less than 20 seconds, but the message was devastatingly clear. Alara slowly put the phone down, her heart hammering against her ribs. GMT+2. It was Katerina. She turned to face Henry. He had thrown the magazine onto the coffee table. He was breathing quickly, his chest rising and falling beneath his sweater. His eyes, for the first time since the accident, were not blank. They were wide, alert, and filled with a cold, desperate panic. "Who was that?" Alara asked, her voice deliberately soft. Henry swallowed hard. He rubbed his forehead, a familiar gesture he hadn't used since the crash. "Wrong number," he mumbled, retrieving his neutral mask, but the attempt was shaky. "Some telemarketer. They asked for you by name," Alara countered, "and they mentioned GMT+2. The mention of the time zone broke the charade. Henry's face froze. The amnesiac mask slipped completely. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the windows and doors with a practiced, military swiftness that had nothing to do with systems integration. Alara realized that the man sitting across from her was no longer merely faking memory loss. He was actively terrified. He was not an amnesiac trying to recover his life. He was a highly trained asset trying to hide from his superiors. The organization knew he had the data, or at least, they knew he was the only one who knew where it was. And now they were initiating the retrieval process. Alara took a step back. She knew the clock had just run out. Alara didn't wait for Henry to offer an explanation. She walked straight over to the bookshelf, pulled the skirting board open, and took the passport and the P.O. box key from her hiding spot inside. She threw them onto the coffee table. "Tell me about Istanbul," she demanded, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "Tell me about Katrina Thodorou." Henry stared at the documents. The amnesia was gone, replaced by a deep, weary frustration. He opened his mouth not to lie, but to finally speak the truth. Before he could utter a word, a faint, almost inaudible metallic click came from the front door. It wasn't a smash or a kick. It was the sound of a professional lock-picking or a key card override. Henry's head snapped toward the sound. The look of panic in his eyes intensified. "Get down!" he barked, his voice losing its soft, compliant tone and taking on the sharp authority of command. He grabbed Alara and pulled her roughly behind the heavy sofa just as the front door swung silently inward. 3 figures entered the house. They moved with silent, synchronized precision. The leader was a woman, sharp features, dark suit, undoubtedly Katrina Thodorou. "Henry," Katerina said, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden silence. "Do not complicate this. We only want the drive. And we want you back in the fold." Henry surged up, moving not like an injured man, but like a coiled spring. His movements were fluid and instantaneous. He knocked a lamp onto the floor to distract them and created a barrier. The operatives closed in. One moved too quickly. Henry lashed out with a trained, highly reflexive block and strike that disarmed the operative of his weapon, sending it skidding across the hardwood floor. This wasn't the action of a software consultant. This was the action of a field agent. Katerina paused, watching her former asset. "He has his memory back, or enough of it," she stated, confirming Alara's worst fears. Henry's eyes flickered to Alara, who was cowering behind the sofa. In that brief, agonizing moment of eye contact, his mask dropped completely. The fear was real, but so was the fleeting, desperate look of love and recognition. He had chosen her. "The basement," he whispered urgently to Alara, pointing toward the utility closet in the kitchen. "Laundry chute, go, now." He threw a heavy ceramic vase across the room, forcing Katerina's attention back to him, sacrificing himself to buy her precious seconds. Alara didn't hesitate. She scrambled across the floor, driven by Henry's desperate command. She reached the utility closet, yanked the door open, and retrieved the USB drive container from the compost pile outside the vent. She knew that leaking the data would expose Henry's life, but saving millions of other lives was the only logical outcome. Alara jammed the USB drive container down the laundry chute and followed it, landing hard in the basement. The service door was unlocked. She retrieved the drive and sprinted out into the alley. Above her, the fight ended abruptly. Silence. Henry had been subdued. Alara heard the faint, distant wail of sirens, likely called by a startled neighbor. She drove straight to a secure Wi-Fi hotspot 20 miles away. She used the disposable connection to send a package of encrypted files to Samuel, which contained the entire Advanced Data Intrusion Program and a cover letter exposing the organization, detailing its structure, and identifying Katrina Thodorou. She set the release for precisely 90 minutes later. The news broke just as she reached the bus station. The USB drive's contents were public, immediately picked up by major global security outlets. The organization's plan was permanently foiled, the schematics rendered useless. Alara knew the police report would read botched home invasion, and Henry would vanish into the black site system. But she had made the choice. She saved the world, and in doing so, she finally ended the lie. The fabricated life was over. The data was exposed. The organization was crippled. Alara bought a one-way ticket, knowing she was finally free, though permanently alone. Subscribe if you liked the story, and give a like.